What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shape their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community, I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. Many years ago, I had the opportunity to work on a book titled Never Die Easy with my athletic hero, Walter Payton. Walter had been diagnosed with a rare liver disease and in the last weeks of his life, wanted to tell his story. In our time together, I learned that he was a greater man than he was a football player. And that's saying a lot because he is the greatest running back of all time. The experience was life-changing for me. And I say life-changing because out of that book grew a relationship with his two amazing children, Jarrett and Brittney Payton, who are our guests today to celebrate what would have been Walter's 68th birthday. Both Jarrett and Brittney have established amazing media careers and continue to honor their father's legacy through their work with the Walter and Connie Payton Foundation.
Him just being there just made all the difference.
I do realize how much of an impact it was having him there, coaching me there, knowing that he was there in the infield. His guidance and his coaching, I always remember him at all my track meets.
I just think about being present is so important.
That was something I always looked to, him being there at those meets.
Brittney said it. It just amped me up just a little bit more knowing that he was there and to know that he could whistle and he'd have my attention. Being present, that was what was most important.
Brittney, Jarrett, thank you so much for joining us.
We are happy to be here, excited to kind of get us all together. And when you asked us to do this, it was like a no-brainer. Yes, we want to be involved. We want to do this. So it's always exciting for me here to be talking with my brother too, who I don't get to see that often. He's on the other side of the country from where I'm at. So it's nice to just have us all here together in one spot.
Yeah, it's always good to see you, Brittney. And Don, you know you stay close to my heart, man. I only have a couple of books behind me, but you know what I always keep there in reach, man. It's always great to talk to you.
I've got Dad up there. I've got his jersey over here. I'm always representing. I love you guys. And by the way, there's no cooler backdrop than the two of you. You got Jarrett, you've got that Super Bowl trophy, and then that has-been college football back there. Brittney, you got all those Emmys back there.
You're going to see this. The original
look at that
program from the Super Bowl 20.
Man.
Still my favorite logo of all Super Bowls because it was just kind of clean and classic.
Yes, it was.
Now they got all the craziness.
Who won Super Bowl 20?
That one team over there.
Oh, yeah.
Those Bears.
That's right. Those little guys in Chicago. There's a lot of folks I could talk to about Walter Payton's on-field excellence. His football gift was evident to the world. But what I really hope that comes from today's conversation is an understanding for those who are listening about what made him special was really relationships and love and mentorship and the many things that he gave you to as much as anything. Can you each share maybe a story about growing up Payton? What was it like to be in that wild and woolly time window of life in the Payton household?
Brittney's first.
Oh, me. When you think about it, it is because I think because of the age gap too, there's like a difference in memories of what I think Jay has and what I have. And I was just barely born when Dad was playing football. So most of my time spent with him was outside of football and not even really realize the magnitude that Walter Payton had, that our dad had, really until after he passed away. He was just Dad. Yes, I do feel like we got to live kind of this really interesting life where we got opportunities to do things with him that most people wouldn't, but that was just our norm. Those were the things that we did with dad when we were going to events. Or, I always think of this picture of Jarrett and I and dad sitting courtside at a Bulls game, during the height of the Bulls season, and being able to go after the game and meet Scottie Pippen and seeing him shake hands and hug Michael Jordan and all those things. Those aren't just normal things everyone does, but that was part of our norm with dad. We couldn't walk through a mall without being stopped by everyone. But one thing about dad is he always took that time to stop for those people, to shake their hands, to meet them, to ask them about their kids, whether he knew them or not. He always was very present and engaging with his time. And I think that's so rare of professional athletes these days, especially people who were at the magnitude of what my dad was. But he always took the time. As a person, as a human, I try and carry on, and I want to teach my kids. It's just about being present, being there, being friendly, talking to people, asking them questions. Dad did that all the time, even on days when maybe he didn't feel like it.
Yeah. That's probably the biggest lesson
Yeah.
that I've learned. That's the one thing that I think about the most when I think about dad, is that he gave everybody time. Every day that I walk out of my house, there's someone that has a story of when they met him, whether it was at the grocery store, whether it was him fixing a tire for someone on his way to Soldier Field for a football game, to this lady a couple of months ago told me she was at Jewel Osco and she was coming around the corner back in the day and my dad was still playing. And I think she took her cart and ran over his foot and he jumped up and acted like his foot was broken. She's going, oh my gosh, I actually almost injured Walter Payton. And he gave me a hug and gave me some time. And him being gracious with his time, to me, is why he was called Sweetness, man. He gave everybody time. I don't remember a lot of him growing up playing football because, frankly, I'm just going to be brutally honest, I didn't like football at all. I didn't care for football. It wasn't in my mindset, didn't want to play it. I knew everybody else loved him because he was that football player, but he was still the guy that was grounding me.
You got grounded quite a bit.
Yeah, I did. Hey, I took kind of the brunt of all this before Brittney getting into some trouble. He was hard on me.
Jarrett, don't worry. It wasn't about you. Brittney had him wrapped around her finger.
Well, I know. But you know what the great part about it was? Him being hard on me was the best thing that he could have ever done. I'm very, very thankful for the way that I've turned out, because he knew that it wasn't going to be easy and that he had to show me something. And he did throughout all of the life lessons that I've learned, going to the Bulls games, had an opportunity to go with him to the White House and meet H.W. Bush and play golf, go to Camp David. These experiences for me that I thought were, like Brittney said, normal. Now that I'm 41 years old, we were like living in a movie. It makes it special to kind of know that you have all those moments in the back of your mind.
I was with your dad at an airport, and there was a gentleman and a little boy sitting probably 100 feet away. It was pretty obvious to us sitting there that he was pointing at your dad and talking to his little boy and trying to explain who your dad was and his greatness. Your dad got up and walked over there and actually kneeled down to the little boy and talked to him. And I get choked up thinking about it, because who does that? Be present. The presence of Walter was never to be bigger than other people, to actually take yourself down to whatever level is required to make connection. And that connection is why I think people loved him.
Yeah. His legacy continues. You have these adults or these people who are young kids who had those interactions with him, and then they're telling their kids about him who weren't even around when he played, that might have not even been born before he even passed away, but they know the legacy of Walter Payton because what has continued to be passed down, the way that continues on, it is really special because it just speaks to the type of person that he was. He was amazing. His moves were sweet on the field and, all the accolades. But really, the person that he was and the time he took is what has kept that legacy and impact that he's left on people.
I love it. But there was a second legacy for you, Britt, when you were growing up running track and field. And there was your dad, a guy who could put one foot in front of the other pretty darn well, offering you some coaching and guidance and cheering for you. He's just your dad. I get that.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about what that was like, having someone as extraordinary trying to offer you guidance?
Running track and field, that was obviously my biggest passion and what I love so much. I feel like I ran a lot like my dad. I always walked on my toes. I ran on my toes. I had completely flat feet, just like my dad did. And as a young girl, in my head, my goal was always to run track and field. I want to make it to the Olympics one day. And I think if he were around, that is something that may have been possible
Mm.
because his guidance and his coaching, I always remember him at all my track meets, being there in center field, watching what was going on, giving that leading hand, but not being overbearing, letting you go out there and do your thing, but also being there for that support. And that was something I always looked to, him being there at those meets. I just kind of talked about this with my husband the other day because we were watching my daughter run with some other kids, and all the parents and all they were like, oh my gosh, she's like a gazelle. I mean, look how fast she is. Her gym teacher always telling me, no one can catch her in tag because she's so quick. It brings me back to those days and reminds me a lot of dad. When he passed away, it was hard for me to go back to running track. It wasn't the same without him being there. And that's actually when I stopped running. I didn't have that coaching. He wasn't there in the infield, and it just wasn't the same. And I kind of just took a step back because it was so important for me in having that time with him. And so it changed the direction. So that wasn't the path that was to lead, but I do realize how much of an impact it was having him there, coaching me there, knowing that he was there in the infield, waiting for that start time after being able to run and seeing there. And so when he wasn't, it just was not the same for me.
Mm. You know, Jarrett, you mentioned earlier that football wasn't your thing. You were pretty darn good at soccer, that sport with no arms. Still can't figure it out.
No arms. I like it.
But quite legendarily, your father would be there for your games and apparently caused quite a stir sometimes. But all he wanted to do, he just wanted to focus on you while he's there.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the importance of parentally presence, the importance of being there.
It's one of the things that I speak about all the time. So it just like kind of made my heart start beating a little bit harder when Brittany talked about it. And I just think about being present is so important. And it's what I'm battling with right now in my life with my kids. I'm home really late. I don't really get to see them. I take them to school, but I don't get to see them till the next morning during the week. I battle with that. And I just know that my dad battled with who he was as a person. To be a grown up now and a father, a business owner, and all these other things, your time is limited. You have to be able to manage your time. I think about people pulling him in the different directions back in those days, but he was at a lot of soccer games of mine back in the day and would sit in the corner by one of the corner flags of the direction that I was coming down that we were scoring on. And Brittany said it. It just amped me up just a little bit more knowing that he was there and to know that he could whistle and he'd have my attention. It would get me back refocused again because in some ways I was a little bit of a hothead growing up, and especially on the field. People were always trying to get underneath my skin. They knew who they were playing, especially if he was there. Then they were coming at me even harder. And being a freshman playing varsity, it was a battle. And then my sophomore year playing varsity, it was even bigger battle because there was more of a spotlight on us because I was playing with the best kid in the nation at that time, Gatorade Player of the Year. Both of us were forwards, and he would whistle at both of us, get us back in check. Him just being there just made all the difference. Football, football was a different story because I don't think I was ready for everything that was coming my way with football. I really didn't. Brittany will tell you, football wasn't on in our house
No.
like it is probably in our houses
Now.
on the weekends.
All the time. But growing up, it wasn't like that. Yeah.
It wasn't like that. We didn't like sit on Monday night or Sundays. It was like Bears football. And I know this is going to shock people out there, but that's just the way it was around our house. So, Don, Brittany, I don't even know if Brittany knows this. I didn't even know the rules, the real like rules to football when I started playing my junior year in high school. No clue. No clue all the rules. I knew how to run. I was fast. I was kind of big. I put on a little weight, but I didn't know the rules.
Mhm.
There was this game my junior year. I'll never forget this. We're in our 2-minute drill. And it was like my first time in a 2-minute drill. And we're driving down. Nice little pass out of bounds, a run, quick to the ball, throw here and there. And then we get down and we're like inside of 30 and the clock is ticking at 10 and it's going down and I'm trying to get the play off. And I drop back, I get it off. It's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Soccer, once I heard the horn, I thought game was over. So I like just stopped and I was like, oh man. And I turned around. I still had a last play. I had the last play. Like I could have thrown it. I had no clue. And I had two guys come and slam me down on the ground. And I'll never forget looking at my dad after that game. He looked at me with pain that I didn't know, but that understanding that I didn't know either, because we didn't talk a lot of football.
Mhm.
I just wanted them to be at my games. And like you guys talked about being present, that's all. Him and my mom, I just wanted them to be at games.
Yeah.
That was what was most important. He hit the remote start on his car. I could tell he was a little bit embarrassed that I didn't know that, but that's where I was. So for me, this was always been a balance of trying to figure out what I was doing in every profession of my life, because I've kind of walked into it blind in everything that I've ever done.
Like you said, people probably wouldn't think that, but really, in our household growing up, our parents never pushed anything on us. They really let us
No.
be our own people and come into our own people and then guiding us kind of on the right path and whatever we wanted to do. They were extremely supportive of that. Both my mom and my dad always kind of gave us that feeling that whatever it is that you want to do, you can do it. You put hard work into it, you do it, and you can achieve that. And it doesn't matter what it is. Me even learning football was really, the first football games really going to were going to my brother's games and then going down to the University of Miami to watch him play. And that's where I think my love of football started to come the more I learned and understood. It's funny how even for my dad, I didn't know him playing, but after he passed away and all the tributes and learning more and watching the video and seeing him on the field is when then I started to just become a fan of Walter Payton, the football player.
Oh man.
That expanded my love for football and the game,
Yeah.
because as a kid, he wasn't going around being like, hey, look at my highlights, watch what I did here. We weren't seeing any of that stuff because he was just dad. So it wasn't until later.
He was the kind of person that wouldn't do that anyway.
No.
He wouldn't force his highlights on you. Like I show my son like every Saturday afternoon, like check these highlights out on YouTube.
Yeah. But I wish I had those opportunities now as a fan of the game and how much I love football to be able to sit back and watch a game with him and be able to get his input or get his analyzing. Those are the things that I wish we would have had a chance to do, because to be able to sit and actually talk about that stuff with him and the knowledge that he has, to see him kind of dissect plays as they're coming on the field, it just would have been, those are the times that you miss out on.
I do think about that all the time. I wish he was around to sit and watch a game with, or covering the Bears, what he would think about the organization and the moves that they're making when all this stuff is going on and they're hiring this person. Like, I just wish that he was around, not just only to talk about it with, that he could actually be here, because I feel like his destiny, honestly, was to be an owner, to be in a front office, like to make those decisions because of his football IQ. So I think about that very, very often.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just his football IQ, his business IQ. He was involved in so many things, as you all know. I mean, restaurants and connected to the Lanigans and all these individual efforts, including an effort to become an owner of an NFL team in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that a great leader will teach others is how to handle failure. And both of you had to have lost at some period in which your dad just wrapped his arm around you properly and gave you some level of guidance on how to handle that moment. Give me a story.
It had to be in high school, my sophomore year, right before I switched over to football. In that season of my sophomore year, I don't think I've ever dedicated myself to something where I was so invested that young of age, where it was like every single week we were trying to figure out certain things. And as a soccer player, Don, you're down south. Football is everything. At that time, here in the state of Illinois, we had the two best soccer teams in the country. St. Charles was number one in the country. We were ranked in that top 10. We got even down to number 5. And only team that we really lost to was St. Charles, and we lost to them in the state semifinals. It was a morning game. people here still in St. Charles are talking about that game when I go places because they remember seeing dad at the game. And it was a cold game, and he had his Bears onesie on that he's had zipped all the way up. We were playing with leggings on, and we lost 1-0. I just remember walking off the field and him just being there, just looking at me because he knew that I was distraught and I was crying because I was just upset. And he was like, "You got to get back to the drawing board." I didn't know what he meant at that time. I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You guys got to figure out." And he's talking to me about what I need to do as a soccer player for the next year to keep getting better. He was already thinking about working, which makes sense because that's how he was with me when I got into football as well. And then we talked a little bit later on about just how amazing the season was because not only was I invested, Brittney knows he was invested in our team too. Like we would have these pasta parties and he'd be out of town, but he would still call and talk to the whole entire team on speakerphone in our house. Every kid, Don, could you imagine what it was like being a high school kid? Even though the kids knew me, they're sitting there like he's giving us a motivational speech before we're going out to play a big time game. And we're all just like, holy cow, like, let's go. Like, we're ready to run through a wall just to give me that insight that he was giving me after the game and looking at me, gave me a hug. And then it was like, okay, it's time to go. But my mindset was, I'm already done with this. I don't want to go through this again.
He's teaching you that mindset.
Yeah.
What happened has happened. We can no longer do anything about that.
Let it go.
And the ability to flip that script so quickly really is the definition of excellence.
Yes.
Too many people wallow in their sorrow and they spend far too long complaining about the what if.
It made me think of after he passed away. It's not about really forgetting what happened. In some ways, you got to let it go and you got to move on. You got to attack what's coming your way. Dad passes. I'm at Soldier Field. We're about to get into the car. And in my mind, the same way of flipping from soccer to football, I had a girlfriend at that time. She was at Illinois State. And I was thinking in my head after he passed, I'm going to take some time off, get my head together, relax. We're in season in Miami. And in my head, I already had my mind made up that I'm going to take some time off. I need to work on me. Next thing you know, the Reverend Jesse Jackson looked at me and he asked me right before I got in the car, he goes, "So what are you going to do?" I said, "I think I'm going to take some time off. I think I'm going to relax a little bit, get my head together, be with my family." Hits me with one of the biggest questions I've ever had in my life. "What do you think your dad would want you to do?"
Ooh.
It hit me like a ton of bricks. He'd want me to get back into my routine, not forget about me, because you'll never forget about me. It's always going to be there, but you got to be able to move on. If I would have waited, I might not have went back to Miami.
Yeah.
I had to go back. First game back was Virginia Tech, and I got a chance to play in Blacksburg. And so I needed my teammates around me.
Is that the game where you changed your jersey numbers?
Changed my jersey number that game.
To wear number 34.
Yeah. He's teaching you to kind of move on from the loss and get back to it, coming up with that new playing brand, get back on the game field. And I think of our 8th grade track meet. We went downstate and we had this 4x1 relay team and we were just like unstoppable.
Unstoppable.
Like every match we were at, we would blow people away. We were great. Well, we get down to state and, state's a whole different ball game. In our last heat, we lost. I mean, we were up against these competition and other girls from other parts of the state and toughest competition we had yet. But the thing for us, though, we still had one of our best times that we had recorded. So it wasn't like we didn't do what we needed to do. It's just that our best that day wasn't the best. It wasn't good enough. Going from that, you kind of feel demoralized, like, man, we were so great. But my lesson from him was, you guys went out there and you competed at your best. You gave it your all when you were out there. And that's all you can ask for. And some days and sometimes in life, that still just might not be good enough. But if you know that you put in all your effort to do everything that you can do, then you're still winning there. And knowing that in life, sometimes, even when you go out, you try your hardest, you do your best, you still might not come out with that win. There's still going to be times in your life where you're going to have failure, and that's okay. Knowing that that is going to be part of life in all aspects of life, forget just sports. That's something that I just know and take. And I think about that too, and how I teach that to my kid too, going on and knowing that in life, it's not always going to work out how you want it to. You're not always going to get the best prize. You might, but if you go out and you give it your best, you train, you give it your all, and you try your hardest, that's all you can ask for. And then you're winning in that category. Life is going to have a lot of disappointments. As long as you go out there, you're doing your best, you're doing what you can, and knowing that some days it's going to be good enough and some days it might not, but knowing that that's going to be okay.
It's funny. Your father was a great fan. I mean, we had a number of conversations around John Wooden, the great basketball coach at UCLA. And that was Coach Wooden's definition of success. Did you give your very best? And if you brought your very best, then you had success. Jarrett, you talked about when you were on the field, there were times when people knew they were competing against Walter's son. There's extra pressure there. Did he ever spend time talking to you all about dealing with pressure?
Oh, man. The stuff that we have now with the social media and the internet wasn't a thing back in the day. So
Different pressure.
different pressure. He'd always tell me, don't be like me, be better than me. I didn't understand what that meant back in the day because he was the best. He was the greatest. So I was like, what are you talking about? Especially when I started playing football. Dad was who he was, man. I mean, he would walk into a room and literally the air would get sucked out of the room because everybody would be like, but now in my 40s, I get what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about as an athlete. He was just talking about as a person. He wanted me to be that person that was doing everything that he was doing off the field and pretty much what I strive to be because I always knew that there was always only going to be one Walter Payton. There was never going to be another one. He was the only one, the one of one. I was just trying to be me. I've always been searching for that connection. I keep the connection on my dad really, really close. I talk about him every day. I mention him every single day. That's just how I am. But I also have tried to figure out a way to have my own identity and carve out my own niche. That's always been my battle. And I felt like I've done a good job. Like Brittney said, growing up 7, 8, 9, 10, I think it was like in high school where I understood that people were coming at me. When I was younger, my mom kind of handled most of that stuff because my mom would be at a lot of games too. My mom took me to a lot of the tournaments that we would travel to, and people would know who I was and they would yell at me, "You'll never be like your dad." Like when I'd have the soccer ball on my foot, and I literally would stop dead on the soccer field and look at them like, what? And then I just would see my mom run and just be like handling it herself because listen.
I wouldn't want to take Connie on.
No.
Listen, I'm just telling you, as much as we talk about dad, mom is the real rock and G of our family. That's the one that you really don't want to mess with. Dad, you can maybe get away with a little. Mom, like, she helped me out because I was the first boy, but if you get on her bad side, that is not the person you want to mess with. So
she's a complete mama bear, that's for sure.
Yeah, she is. I can say for Brittney, but he never had that conversation. So it was really trial and error.
Yeah.
And it was learning on our own. It was trying to find a way to understand who we were and not feel bad about it and ashamed about it, but embrace it and use it.
Yeah. Oh, he and mom both always taught us too, there is going to be extra pressure on you. There is going to be that extra spotlight because of the name. So when you're going out there, people are already have their own preconceived notions of who you are. They think they know what's going on or what you're going to do. So let them talk and that's fine. And sometimes because of that name, that may help open the doors for us to get into things and whatnot. But then it's about what you do with that opportunity when you get it. Maybe that name helps to open the door. People say this, but show them who you are then on the field. Do your best. Or if that name opens the door and something in life for Jarrett and I say, then you go in and you show them what a great worker you are and how much you can do and put your nose to the ground and do your absolute best. So using that, but then embracing it and letting that make you even better.
Yeah.
Show them really, okay, you're not giving me this opportunity because of this. It's because of how hard I work or how good I can do at this. And really showing that who you are and embracing that name and letting that Payton name strive you to a point of excellence and doing your best and giving your all.
I love it. Don't just rest on it. In fact, build upon it.
Exactly.
Jarrett, Brittney had the great line earlier about, well, this was just the life we grew up with. We had no idea. You had an experience one time where a guy who wore jersey number 23 knocked on the door one day at your house.
Yeah, man. Crazy because at that time I had to be at least 12 years old. Brittany's 4 years younger. She had probably her pigtails in with the barrettes looking real. Her hair was always on point. I gotta talk. It still is.
It still is.
Thank you.
But back then, it was always on point. And I remember the knock at the door, and Dad whistled, go open up the door. And we had these two lights by the cars I could see, but I couldn't really see because we didn't have the closer lights on. And once I opened up the door and saw it was MJ, man, it was kind of like that gasp. I was just outside shooting a basketball with a fake signature of yours on it in the driveway. And now you're standing here in front of us. He comes in, and normally we would take our company's coats on our washer and dryer instead of putting it in our coat room because, as you know, Don, you're a Florida State fan. My mom had all her fur coats in there, and Burt Reynolds used to send all those leather coats to my dad.
Yeah.
So they went downstairs. We had this atrium in the middle of our house. You could see glass all around, and I could see them down there. My dad was fixing some cards, and he was just shuffling. And I heard the whistle to come downstairs, so I did. Mike wanted me to come up and get the money that was in his pockets, and I did, and it was all rolled in rubber bands. And I brought it down to him. He gave me $5. I went upstairs, put it in my piggy bank, and I waited a little bit. And about, I would say, another 2 hours, I got the whistle again, came down, and Dad had all this money in his hand. He was just counting it like this.
He'd taken money from Michael.
Gave me $100 and said, tell Mike, thank you. And I said, thank you, Mike. And I ran upstairs and I put that in there. Those two, man, they battled at everything that you could imagine. They were playing pool. I think if it was earlier in the day, they probably would have been in the shooting gallery, shooting off guns down there in the basement. When you get two competitors like that into a room, like my dad said, nobody wants to lose.
Yep.
Cool to see, though, the two of them both being at the heights of their careers, being in a city like Chicago, and just having such a mutual respect for each other, too.
Yeah.
And there was, kind of a friendship there, too. Who else understands what you're going through or that life than someone else who really just gets it?
Yeah.
They just understand. So knowing like that mutual respect that they had for each other as well was really cool.
It was the perfect handoff, too, from my dad from the 70s to the 80s to Mike in the late 80s and 90s, and then really took off in the early 90s. And for Chicago fans who love the Bears and the Bulls and Chicago sports, that was the perfect time.
Here you are living with Walter Payton and amazed with Michael Jordan, as if you weren't just spending every day with an icon. You decided to be enamored of another.
Dad was just dad, man.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It's crazy because Brittany's kids are still getting to age, but my son is about to turn 10 years old. And he knows a lot about his grandpa. And that's the battle that we are going to have as parents now, teaching them about grandpa, what he was all about. Because everybody that comes up to my son, who is a perfectionist, who has his own battles with a lot of stuff, he wants to be the best. But then he has that fear as well. Every time someone comes up and talks about his grandpa, all they talk about is how great he is. They never talk about the failures. They never talk about the bad plays. They only talk about how great he is. They walk up to him and they say almost the exact same thing all the time. Hey, little man, Jay, do you know how great your grandpa was? And it's stuck into his head. Grandpa never messed up, that he was always good, that every play was a touchdown. And I'm trying to teach him that's not it. Grandpa had his failures. Grandpa wasn't perfect. He was far from perfect. But these kids now, all they see, Don, is the highlights on YouTube. And the highlights on YouTube don't show any of his failures. It shows all of his greatness. We got to teach our kids about their grandpa and let them know he was human just like all of us.
Yep.
He had his flaws just like everybody else. And he wasn't perfect, but the person that he was, the heart that he had, the striving to be the best, wanting to give back to people, that's why he's remembered. That's why he's talked about every single day.
Those reasons, everything you're talking about right there, are why the NFL renamed its Man of the Year award to include your father's name. You both have this amazing presence every year. My favorite part of the Super Bowl, pregame, there you are. You guys get to hand out the trophy. Is there a favorite memory of one of the people you've had the chance to celebrate in the honor of your father that you would look back and go, my gosh?
Yeah. There's just moments, and there's so many great guys who have won in the years. The award has gotten bigger, and we really try and celebrate all 32 guys that are nominated and bringing them. But when it used to just be 3 guys each year, which was a couple years back, after the award show, we used to go out as a family and take these guys and we would go just have a dinner somewhere in whatever city the Super Bowl was in. One of my favorite years was after we were at a Mastros, and it was Peanut Tillman, Thomas Davis, and Anquan Bolden. We had a huge seafood tower, all the food we were enjoying, but just sitting and knowing those guys with their families, their wives, sharing stories that they had, sharing stories about my dad, the laughs. It just was one of my favorite Super Bowl memories. And one of the reasons those 3 guys too are just always so special to us, because they really just felt like family. They all did such amazing work and are just great men, and really represent, to me, just the best of what the NFL is. Not only were they amazing athletes on the field, they all did so much work and were so hands-on with their organizations. And then they were also just great men, great fathers, great husbands, and just leaving such a legacy for their own kids. So one of my favorite memories.
I love it because the real challenge is that too often the media, we've spent so much of our time focused on the negative, the people that are not representative. So the idea that you get to sit and revel in all that goodness,
Yeah.
so amazing. Jarrett, you got to give me one.
That's it right there. She took
It's
it.
the same one?
Yeah, man.
It was like one of the best times, right?
Epic. We were in Arizona.
Yeah.
It was just like the perfect night. And all those guys were really close with all 3 and still are to this day. And Anquan was like on his way, and we were like watching him being nominated and all the great things that he was doing. Then that night, Thomas Davis and his speech that night was just incredible, pushing the guys in the league to keep doing more. When you feel like you've done a lot, and do a little bit more. And that night was just special. It was like Mastros was crowded and it was loud.
Mastros City Hall.
Yeah.
I live right down the street from there now. And every time I pass it, I think of that night. I do.
Don, you know when you're in a crowded place, but you feel like your group is like the only group there and you can't hear anything else.
Boy.
That's how that night was. And we were laughing till we cried. We were eating. It just keep getting chills. That night was amazing. If I had to pick another night, I think it was New York. New York was cool because we had dinner with Charles Tillman, and Charles was really close to us and being a Bear, and he was asking us a lot of questions about dad at dinner.
Oh,
To me, that was just a really, really cool moment.
Yeah.
that's it. Today, we have a lot of athletes who have their children introduce them at Hall of Fames. But Jarrett, you were kind of the first. I love listening to that high-pitched voice of yours. What do you remember about your dad asking you to introduce him at the Hall of Fame?
We were in the kitchen of our old house in South Barrington. I guess when he found out before he got into the house that there needed to be a change, and he came to me, and I was sitting on, Brittany, if you would walk straight into the kitchen, that one chair that was sitting at the front of before you would walk past to go to the refrigerator. Yeah, and he just told me, and Don, I'm gonna be honest with you, I wanted to tell him in my head and in my heart, I just wanted to tell him no, because that was one of the things I was really afraid of. I did not like speaking. I didn't mind getting up and talking freely, but if I had to read something, definitely afraid. There was a conversation Brittany and I had, I'll never forget, when you lived on Cedar. I was telling you, like, it was like around NFL stuff and being out on the field. I remember telling you, like, I'm literally definitely afraid. I do not like reading in front of people. At that time, that's what I was thinking, but I couldn't tell him no. Miss Luna, who was our Annie, who was like our grandma.
The best.
Yeah, the best. She said, Master Jarrett, we are going to come up with this speech and we are going to recite this all summer until you get it perfect. Until you get it perfect.
Oh.
And we did. We went over and over and over this speech. And Don, repetition after repetition. I got up and I did what I had to do.
You crushed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very thankful that he had me do that, because to say you're the first at something is really tough, especially these days. You can't say you're the first at anything, but to say that I was the first to do that, and to see the other kids that have done it for their parents, whether it's in the WNBA, the NBA, it just means the world to me. I'm thankful that he did that. He must have knew in his heart that something was going on with me, and it really helped me. It helped me kind of get past and fight through and walk through my fears to get to what I'm doing right now and my greatness, which is on the other side of what I'm truly passionate about. And if I wouldn't have taken that opportunity, I might not be doing this. I might not be on TV.
You wouldn't be out public speaking?
Yeah,
I love it.
I'm thankful.
You too. I love you both. I thank you for being always so gracious to me, to have been so welcoming, to have allowed me to learn from you today, and for both of you just being such great champions, not just of your father's legacy, but of your own lives. He's smiling. I know he is.
Thanks, Don. You're the best. We love you too.
Love you too, Don.
I hope you felt like you were sitting in the seat at the fireside chat with us. That conversation was just filled with gold. So many amazing lessons from the greatest of all time, Walter Payton. But there were a couple that really stood out to me. The first was when both children talked about how their father encouraged them to attack what is ahead for them and worry less about what was behind. That the failure or the loss or whatever it might have been in their background needed to stay exactly there, and that the focus needed to be on what was ahead. You got to get better. That's what he told Jarrett after a state tournament loss in high school. What a great lesson. We can spend all of our time bemoaning our past, or we can look forward and improve for the future. But the second, and maybe the greater of the two lessons for me, was the importance Walter put on always being present. It did not matter who his audience was, whether it was a 5-year-old child or a business partner. Walter was focused on the person before him, and he gave them his attention. He gave them his respect. And that power of being present is something that both of his children model today in everything they do. Something I'm going to work to model as I leave this podcast, and I hope you do too. Thanks so much today for joining us. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir. How
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.